What if the league's biggest mistake this season had nothing to do with a bad call on the court? What if it happened in a league office, in the form of a $500 fine handed to a player they probably assumed would just pay it and move on? Because that is not what happened, not even close. Instead, that fine set off a chain of events that turned a veteran role player into one of the most talked about personalities in women's basketball, complete with a sold-out shirt, a national brand deal, and a professional wrestling offer from one of the most powerful ownership names in American sports. None of it was planned, none of it was coordinated, and every single piece of it traces back to one decision the league made that they almost certainly wish they could take back. So let's walk through exactly how it happened, why it kept escalating, and what the whole story actually reveals about where women's basketball is heading, whether the league is ready for it or not. Before the fine, before the shirt, before any of it made national headlines, Sophie Cunningham had already been doing something that a growing number of people were starting to pay very close attention to. Not for her scoring, not for highlight reel plays, for something much harder to quantify and, as it turned out, much harder for fans to stop watching once they noticed it. She was protecting Caitlin Clark, quietly, consistently, and without waiting for anyone to ask her to. Cunningham had spent 6 full seasons with the Phoenix Mercury before being traded to the Indiana Fever heading into the 2025 campaign. That made her a 7-year professional by the time the season tipped off, a veteran presence dropped into a locker room that had been completely restructured around a rookie who had arrived carrying more national attention than almost any player in the history of the league. That kind of dynamic, a seasoned veteran suddenly playing second fiddle to a first-year player with a massive following and a target on her back, could very easily have created friction, resentment, a quiet war for positioning that plays out in subtle ways throughout a long season. That is not what happened in Indiana. What happened instead was that Cunningham appeared to embrace the role of protector almost immediately, and fans started noticing long before the mainstream sports media did. Clips had been circulating in Fever fan communities since early in the season, Cunningham stepping between Clark and opposing players, offering a hand after hard fouls, using her body to absorb contact that had no business going uncalled. None of these moments were especially dramatic on their own. They did not go viral individually, but collectively they were telling a story that a dedicated, engaged fan base was already fluent in by the time the summer arrived. That context matters enormously for everything that followed, because when the moment finally came that stopped being quiet and started making national headlines, it did not feel like something new to the people who had been paying attention. It felt like confirmation of something they already knew for months. The narrative was already built, it just needed a single, unmistakable moment to announce itself to everyone else. That moment arrived on June 17th, and it lasted less than 10 seconds. The Indiana Fever were facing the Connecticut Sun, and Caitlin Clark had already taken a shot to the eye earlier in the game, the kind of play that gets noticed, gets briefly discussed, and then gets absorbed into the general physical chaos of a professional basketball game without any real consequence from the officials. Clark was still working through it, still competing, when the situation escalated in a way that made ignoring it impossible. Sophie Cunningham did not wait for a whistle that was not coming. She grabbed Sun guard Sheldon, took her to the ground, and accepted the ejection that followed without any apparent hesitation. Both players were tossed with under a minute remaining on the clock. The game continued, but the moment had already escaped the arena. Within 24 hours, Cunningham had gained roughly 500,000 new followers across TikTok and Instagram combined. Her jersey started moving, her name began trending on its own, completely independent of any box score or stat line. And the reason that happened had almost nothing to do with basketball, and everything to do with frustration that had been building in the fan base for weeks before she gave it something concrete to attach itself to. Here is the thing about that frustration. It was not manufactured. It was not a narrative pushed by a particular media outlet or fan faction looking to start a fight. Coaches across the league had been raising concerns about officiating consistency throughout the season. Fever head coach Stephanie White had publicly acknowledged the growing tension around how games were being called, noting that improvement seemed to be happening everywhere on the floor except among the referees. Multiple coaches around the league echoed variations of the same complaint throughout the summer in post-game interviews, often carefully worded, always pointed. What Cunningham did on June 17th was step into that accumulated frustration and give it a physical form. She did not make a statement, she did not call a press conference, she grabbed someone and went to the floor. And in doing so, she became the answer to a question a lot of people had been asking quietly. Is anyone actually going to do something about this? The answer, apparently, was yes. And the person doing it was a 7th-year veteran from Phoenix who most casual fans had never heard of 4 weeks earlier. That was about to change very rapidly. But first, the league was going to try to do something about Cunningham too, and that decision would turn a regional story into a national one. July 18th, Cunningham posts a video to TikTok that on its surface looks almost too simple to matter. She is lip-syncing to a line from a Sabrina Carpenter song. Stupid, or is it slow? Maybe it's useless. The caption tags some referees. No names attached, no direct accusations, just a pointed, sarcastic jab wrapped in a trending audio clip, the kind of thing that gets posted and forgotten 100 times a day across the platform. Except this one did not get forgotten. It hit 1.3 million views within days, and the WNBA decided it required a formal response. The fine came in at $500. In professional sports terms, that is a rounding error, a minor administrative note, the kind of thing that under normal circumstances gets paid quietly and disappears from the news cycle before it ever really enters one. But these were not normal circumstances, and Cunningham was not the kind of player who was going to let it disappear. She posted about the fine directly on social media. The tone was not angry, it was not defensive, it was almost amused, like someone who had predicted exactly this outcome and found it faintly absurd that the league had decided to prove her right so efficiently. She wrote that she had been fined $500 for the TikTok, that she found the situation somewhat funny, and that the league might want to consider focusing on more pressing matters. Then she moved on. The internet did not move on. Comments flooded in from fans offering to help cover the fine themselves. Jokes spread about the league fining players for pointing out problems, while the problems themselves continued uncorrected. Cunningham was praised loudly and repeatedly for saying out loud what many people had been thinking privately for most of the season. And something important happened in the middle of all of that noise. The story shifted. It was no longer primarily a story about referees missing calls. It had become a story about a player being punished for noticing. That is a fundamentally different conversation, and it was a much stickier one because it added a villain to a narrative that previously only had victims. It is also worth understanding that the $500 fine did not exist in isolation. Earlier that same month, 2 New York Liberty players, guard Natasha Cloud and forward Isabel Harrison, had received a fine warning for wearing hats on the sideline during a game that neither of them was even active for due to injury. Neither incident involved anything resembling unsportsmanlike conduct in any meaningful sense of the phrase, yet both drew formal league attention, while the officiating concerns that coaches had been raising all season apparently did not require the same urgency. That pattern, fines for sideline hats and sarcastic TikToks, while missed calls and inconsistent officiating rolled on uncorrected, fueled a perception that was already forming in the fan base. The league's fine protocols were not just inconsistent, they appeared to be pointed in exactly the wrong direction. There was one more element that made this particular fire harder to put out than the league may have anticipated. The WNBA's fines were not regularly made public by the league itself. They typically became public only when the players chose to share them, which meant the entire system operated in a kind of quiet opacity that served the league reasonably well, as long as players went along with staying quiet.
Cunningham made a different choice. She made the fine visible. She made it legible. She turned it into a data point in an argument that fans were already winning. And in doing so, she did not just represent herself. She gave everyone who had been frustrated with the officiating situation a concrete, specific, undeniable example to point at.
The $500 fine was supposed to send a message. The message it actually sent was not the one the league intended, and it was about to get considerably more complicated because Cunningham was not done, not even close. Barbie night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse was supposed to be exactly what it sounds like, a light-hearted promotional evening. Pink lighting, themed giveaways, the kind of game night spectacle that generates a few social posts and some good vibes before everyone moves on. The Fever were hosting the Chicago Sky. It was supposed to be a fun night. Sophie Cunningham made it into something else entirely. She walked into the arena wearing a plain white t-shirt with 4 words printed across the front. Hot Girls Eat Arby's. Black leather shorts. No elaborate styling, no elaborate explanation. Just a shirt, a pair of shorts, and the kind of confident absurdity that photographs extremely well and spreads across social media before the first quarter is even over. The photo hit the internet within minutes, and the reaction was immediate. But what made this moment work was not just the shirt itself, it was the history behind it. Back in April, Cunningham had posted a video trying Arby's for the first time on camera. It went viral in a low-key, genuinely charming way, not because it was staged or calculated, but because she reacted to the food like a real person and not like someone performing enthusiasm for a brand check. That video was the foundation. By the time the Barbie night shirt appeared, Arby's had almost certainly been watching her account for months. Their marketing team knew who she was, knew what her audience responded to, and had positioned themselves to move fast when the right moment arrived. The right moment arrived at Barbie night, and Arby's moved fast. They reposted the photo, crowned her an unapologetic queen, and effectively named her a brand ambassador in real time in front of an audience that had no idea the partnership was coming. The whole thing felt spontaneous because so much of it actually was. But the brand recognition, the pre-existing relationship, the audience that was already primed to respond, none of that was accidental. Fans flooded the replies with praise. People celebrated both Cunningham and whoever at Arby's had greenlit the collaboration quickly enough to make it feel seamless. And the shirt, available to the public, sold out across small, medium, and large sizes within roughly 2 days. No elaborate campaign behind it, no weeks of planning, no scripted commercial, no influencer contract negotiated months in advance. A player wore a shirt she apparently found funny, a brand recognized the moment and amplified it instead of ignoring it, and the result was the kind of authentic marketing that companies spend enormous amounts of money trying to manufacture and almost never successfully do. The timing of all of this was not lost on anyone paying attention. The Arby's shirt appeared just days after the $500 TikTok fine, a fine that was supposed to make Cunningham more cautious, more measured, more aware of the consequences of drawing league attention. What it actually produced was a player who walked into a nationally covered game night wearing something guaranteed to keep the story going and extend her visibility in every possible direction. By this point in the season, Cunningham's endorsement portfolio had expanded well beyond basketball. Adidas, Quest Nutrition, Ring, skincare brand Mad Hippie, apparel label Skims, sparkling water company Spindrift, Commerce Bank. A wide enough spread that it no longer looked like a single opportunistic deal or a short-term trend play. It looked like a cross-section of brands that had independently arrived at the same conclusion. This player is believable. This player generates genuine attention. This player's audience actually responds. None of them needed her to be the highest scorer on her team. They needed her to be real. And real was exactly what she had spent the entire season proving she was. The Arby's moment confirmed what the brand deals were already saying. But the most unexpected offer was still coming, and it arrived from a direction nobody had predicted. San Diego Comic-Con, a panel with no direct connection to basketball whatsoever. Women of Wrestling founder David McLean is speaking, and midway, he brings up a name that had no obvious reason to come up in that room at that moment: Sophie Cunningham.
McLean, an Indianapolis native who had apparently been watching the Fever closely that season, said he had come away from watching Cunningham convinced that she belonged in a wrestling ring. He reached for a specific comparison, calling her the Marty McSorley of Caitlin Clark's Wayne Gretzky. For anyone not fluent in hockey history, McSorley was the enforcer who played alongside Gretzky for years, the player whose entire role on the ice was absorbing punishment and delivering it when the situation required, protecting the most important player on the team regardless of personal cost. The analogy was pointed and deliberate, and it landed exactly the way McLean intended it to. Sitting beside him at the panel was Jeanie, controlling owner of the Los Angeles Lakers, co-owner of Women of Wrestling alongside McLean, one of the most recognizable names in American professional sports ownership. Buss did not let the moment pass quietly. She took to social media directly and publicly, writing that the promotion would love to have Cunningham join them, calling her talented, dedicated, and a fierce competitor. This was not a casual, offhand remark at a convention panel. This was a public recruitment post from a major ownership figure, made with no ambiguity behind the seriousness behind it. The natural question is obvious. Why would the owner of an NBA franchise take a public interest in recruiting a WNBA player for professional wrestling? And the answer, once you have followed Cunningham's season from beginning to that point, is not actually that surprising. She had become, through a combination of instinct and circumstance, exactly the kind of crossover personality that professional sports rarely produces: physical, outspoken, genuinely comfortable with confrontation, completely unbothered by attention, regardless of where it came from or how much of it arrived at once. Those qualities translate, not just in basketball, in performance, in any arena where presence and authenticity matter more than technical precision. What kept the offer from feeling like a novelty stunt was the infrastructure behind it and the genuine enthusiasm Cunningham herself brought to the subject. Women of Wrestling was not a new venture built around a single viral WNBA moment. The promotion had been running since the year 2000, accumulating 10 seasons and more than 200 episodes, with existing media deals through Pluto TV and Paramount+. This was an established organization with real reach and real programming, extending a real invitation to a player they genuinely believed fit their world. And Cunningham, it turned out, had been a fan of that world for a very long time. On the debut episode of her podcast, launched that same summer, she talked about growing up following professional wrestling with the kind of specific, unprompted enthusiasm that is genuinely difficult to fake for a media appearance. Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Goldberg. She named performers from an earlier era with real affection, the kind that comes from actually watching, not from a publicist's briefing notes. That history gave the offer a credibility it would not have had if it had arrived out of nowhere. This was not a famous athlete being dangled in front of an unfamiliar industry for a one-time appearance. This was a legitimate fan being invited to compete in something she had loved since childhood. Cunningham's response was carefully worded in a way that managed to be completely open without making any actual commitment. She told a reporter covering the Fever that she would not be interested in exploring the opportunity once the WNBA season had concluded. That double negative, intentional and precise, left every door open while closing none of them. It kept the story alive, it kept the speculation running, and it did so without saying a single thing that could be used against her or turned into a distraction from the basketball she was still in the middle of playing. By the time the wrestling conversation entered the public record, Cunningham had stopped being a supporting character in someone else's narrative. She had become, fully and undeniably, the story herself. And the fine that the league had issued weeks earlier to bring her volume down had, in every measurable way, done the exact opposite. Pull back far enough from any individual moment, the TikTok, the shirt, the wrestling offer, and the shape of what happened this season becomes very clear. Every time the WNBA attempted to manage Cunningham's behavior through financial punishment, the punishment generated more attention than the original incident ever would have produced on its own. 3 fines. $400 for the Sheldon incident, $500 for a sarcastic lip sync, $1,500 for comments on her own podcast, each one individually trivial in financial terms. Collectively, they assembled a narrative the league never intended to author, that its most protective, most outspoken, most authentically engaged player kept getting penalized for exactly the qualities her fans most valued in her.
That is a terrible narrative to accidentally build about yourself, and there was no clean way out of it once it had formed. The league's approach to managing player behavior was built on a set of assumptions that made sense in a different media environment. Control the message, issue a quiet fine, move on before the story gains momentum. That approach works reasonably well when players have limited direct access to their audience and depend on league-adjacent media channels to be heard at all. It does not work when the player being fined has a phone, a large social following, and the instinct to post the fine amount publicly before the league's communications department has finished drafting its internal response. Cunningham did not reinvent this dynamic. She simply existed within it with more comfort and more speed than the league knew how to respond to. Other players took notice throughout the season. Her approach, transparent, slightly self-deprecating, entirely public, offered a template that did not require anger or manufactured drama to be effective. She made the mundane administrative act of being fined into content. And content, delivered consistently to an audience that was already invested, compounds in exactly the way a quiet apology never does. The officiating frustration that ran underneath all of this was never really Cunningham's issue alone. Coaches across the league had been raising the same concerns throughout the season in post-game interviews, carefully enough to avoid fines themselves, consistently enough that the pattern was impossible to miss. What Cunningham's fines accomplished, in ways that must have been deeply uncomfortable for the league office, was give all of that distributed frustration a single, visible lightning rod. Fans who had been irritated by officiating issues in New York, Las Vegas, Seattle, Chicago, they all had a concrete story they could point to and a player they could rally around. The fines did not manufacture that sentiment, they organized it. There is a question sitting underneath all of this that nobody in the league office has answered publicly, and probably will not. Was there a version of this situation where improved officiating, addressed earlier in the season, made any of this impossible? Probably. A player cannot become the physical embodiment of fan frustration about missed calls if the calls are not being missed in the first place. A sarcastic TikTok directed at referees does not hit 1.3 million views in a league where the officiating is broadly considered fair and competent. The infrastructure for Cunningham's rise was not built by Cunningham. It was built by a problem the league had and did not prioritize fixing. A $500 fine is, in purely financial terms, a rounding error. Set it against the endorsement interest it helped generate, the follower growth it accelerated, the brand partnerships it indirectly made possible, the wrestling offer from a co-owner of one of the most famous franchises in American sports, and the arithmetic becomes genuinely absurd. The league spent $500 buying Sophie Cunningham's entire next chapter. Consider for a moment what this season would have looked like under a different set of choices. A quieter apology after the Sheldon ejection, a private conversation with the league office instead of a public post about the TikTok fine,
A carefully managed social media presence, scrubbed of anything that could be interpreted as criticism of officiating or league policy. All of those choices were available to Cunningham. All of them would have made her less visible, not more. All of them would have starved the exact moments that turned her into one of the most recognized personalities in women's basketball this season. She chose otherwise at nearly every turn, not out of a calculated strategy, or at least not one that appears to have been engineered in any formal sense, out of instinct, out of a genuine willingness to say what she actually thought, accept the consequences, and find the whole process faintly ridiculous in a way that her audience found completely irresistible. A sold-out Arby's shirt? A national brand ambassadorship announced in real time in front of millions of people who had no idea it was coming. An open invitation into professional wrestling from one of the most powerful ownership names in American sports. A fan base that grew louder and more loyal with every punishment the league handed down. All of it traceable back to a $500 fine that someone in a league office almost certainly assumed would end quietly on a Tuesday afternoon and never come up again. It did not end quietly. It hasn't stopped coming up. And the player at the center of all of it never asked to become a case study in how modern athletes navigate institutional power in the age of social media. She just refused to be quiet when she watched her teammate absorb hits that officials were not calling, decided to say something about it, got fined for saying it, and then said something about that too. That instinct, honest, stubborn, slightly amused at the absurdity of her own situation, is what built the loyalty no brand partnership or wrestling deal can fully explain. It is also, if the league is paying attention, the most important thing to understand about what women's basketball is becoming and the kind of players and personalities who are going to define it in the years ahead. The $500 fine was supposed to be the end of the story. It was the loudest possible beginning.